that I embraced and pursued the rest of my career, even today.
How did your fellow attorneys respond to your interest and the push that you were making for more involvement in legal aid, more finances for legal aid?
Well, certainly not all of them became as rabid about it as I did. By and large, for quite a long time, was no opposition of any sort. If they weren't interested, they just weren't interested. They stepped aside and said, go ahead, you guys who are interested in legal aid, pursue it. That's all right. And we had committees in the Hillsborough County Bar, even before the time I was there, that were addressing the issues. But the tempo picked up, and there was a time when the federal government got into the area of providing legal services for indigents, and there was created something called the Legal Services Corporation. There were a lot of us, including me, initially, who were not too excited about the Legal Services Corporation. We didn't think lawyers ought to be paid for rendering services to the poor. We thought lawyers ought to do that pro bono publico. The more I got into the experience, the more it became apparent to me that the voluntary bar by itself could not meet all the legal needs of the poor. Hillary Rodham Clinton, our now Secretary of State, was interested in the subject as the chair of the Legal Services Corporation. I got to know her slightly through that contact. And she was saying at the time that the amount of money which the government was providing was sufficient to serve no more than 15% of the poverty population. What do you do under those circumstances? Try to get more money, yes, but also try to provide closer cooperation between the federal agency and the voluntary bar. The two at the outset were at odds with each other, to say the least. They were downright bloodthirsty about it. And I devoted a good deal of my time later on in the American bar to addressing that problem and getting the federally funded programs and the voluntary programs working together. And we ultimately were quite successful in that regard. So that there are now more than 1,000 legal aid programs of one kind or another throughout the country. We are meeting the needs of a substantial portion of the population, although I can't begin to say we're doing it 100%, but we're certainly doing far better than we did back then.
During your involvement with the Florida Bar and the American Bar, you also argued a number of cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. Tell us about arguing before the Supreme Court.
Well, if you're not scared to death, which is easy to do if you're not there frequently, it's a very easy court to argue before because they're all so well prepared and they've read the briefs, and you don't have to tell them very much about what this case is about and what at issue. The big problem you have in arguing, I think, before the United States Supreme Court is to get a word in edgewise, because the questions are coming from the bench on this corner, that corner, the other corner, so that sometimes you simply have to say, well, wait a minute, you're taking all my time. Now, give me a little bit of time to make my argument. it was a great experience. Fortunately, by that time, I had tried enough lawsuits and argued enough appeals that I really wasn't scared absolutely to death, although I was certainly respectful of the court and the atmosphere in which I was arguing.
During the 1970s, you were approached by Chester Ferguson, who was the chairman of the Board of Regents at the Florida University Board of Regents, asking whether you might be interested in a university presidency.
That is true. And I used to kid Chester by telling him he was just trying to get me into a university so that I wouldn't be a competitor in the practice of law in Tampa. But he was quite serious about the university system and gave good leadership to the Board of Regents in that regard. I had several opportunities to gain appointments as president of one time, most of the time it was Florida State University. One time was the University of Florida. And ultimately, USF, University of South Florida, which Marshall Kreiser, by that time, offered me the opportunity to serve at USF while they were getting a permanent president for USF since Cecil Mackey had left rather quickly to take another post. At the time, I didn't have a very heavy trial schedule, and I'd always been tempted, as it were, by education as a professional pursuit anyway. So that's what I did. I accepted the offer to be interim president at University of South Florida and served out there for about a year, which was a marvelous experience, one that I don't regret in the least. I often wonder whether I should have stayed at USF. I ultimately decided, no, that I should run for the presidency of the American Bar Association. Timing is everything in life at certain times.
Following USF, you took on the challenge of becoming elected to the president of the ABA, which was a nationwide campaign. You were successful there. The top agenda of your presidency was also aid and legal services for the indigent.
Yes.
And the Reagan administration fought you all along the way.
I was committed to legal aid, pro bono publico activity. We had gotten the federally funded programs and the volunteer programs and the workers working together. We had gained an awful lot of strength and momentum, and we didn't want to lose that.
After the ABA, you returned to Tampa. You became very involved with the Chamber of Commerce, leadership within the Chamber of Commerce. You took on some challenging roles helping Tampa General Hospital. You really immersed yourself in the community here.
Well, I was immersed to begin with, but yes, I think all of us as citizens owe something, some of our private time, or to the support of the common cause, and we ought to work in activities like that to the extent that we can under the circumstances. And I guess I like to be involved, so that helped a good deal in terms of motivation.
You've done more than become involved. You've taken on important and very time-consuming leadership responsibilities in all the organizations. And what does that say about your character? You're often in the lead.
Except I don't have much good sense. I don't know, maybe that's my maternal grandmother talking to me again and say, if you're going to do it the best you can. She sort of gave me a motto which is not particularly relevant to the question that's pending right now, but she taught me that a good name is rather to be had than great riches. And I have never forgotten that. And I guess more I worked for a good name than I did for great riches.
Well, Reece, I'm afraid we're out of time, so I'd like to thank you very much for being our guest today.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
If you'd like to see this interview again or any of our other previous Suncoast Business Forum interviews, you can go to our website at wedu.org/SBF. Thank you for joining us for the Suncoast Business Forum.
There's no one exactly like you. No one has the same financial goals or cares about the same people. That's why Raymond James Financial Advisors have the independence to offer unbiased advice that's right for you. And it's why we pioneered the idea of financial planning. You might say we're just as unique as you are. Raymond James, individual solutions from independent advisors.